Are you guys familiar with negative interest rates? Well, let us look at how they come into the picture. So the year is 1973, and Switzerland is going below zero. They are trying to keep their safe haven currency from, over appreciating. But why? You see, for you to understand this very well, you need to go back to the Second World War. And when you think about the Second World War, it's a bunch of countries fighting each other, bombs. And you know what it takes to keep a war going? You borrow money, and a war is more than bombing someone else. So they used to buy other currencies just to supply them in large quantities so that they drop in value. So there was economic wars, there was, weapons of mass destruction. There was all these things. And let's stick to the economic part. So there was a lot of economic chaos during the Second World War. So the West, majorly the West, of course, Russia was in the agreements and in the processes, but it did not sign the final agreement. Why? It said it's another hand for the Wall Street, something like that. They were communists, so it wasn't really their thing. So the West, led by the USA, they put up an agreement called the Bretton Woods system. And this is what changed the world. Basically, what this system used to do, or what it meant, different currencies were pegged to the dollar in certain parity rates. And the dollar in turn was also pegged to gold. Other people actually call it the gold standard system. So the dollar was like really the strongest, it was very, very strong at that time because every currency had to be first switched to dollar before it is switched to another currency. So, and then the dollar to sustain its strength, it had to be pegged also to the, to gold. But you see, the one thing you should trust America is shady politics. So in 1971, under Nixon, of course, the guy that spoils everything. So President Nixon chooses to suspend this Bretton Woods agreement. Why? They had a lot of domestic problems and they couldn't keep up with it anymore. You know what suspension means? It means we are going into more chaos. So now currencies used to be pegged to the dollar. Now they are floating freely. That is dangerous, especially if you just throw it at people. It's dangerous when you just surprise people with big decisions just like that. So when other currencies begin floating like freely, it simply means now we are no longer into that forced system of you have to do this before you buy this currency. You have to do this before you print this currency. Now we are dealing with forces of demand and supply. We are dealing with normal reasons, like any country could outperform any other country without worrying about breaking any agreements. So now the competition is on. I'm talking about economic competition. But you see, the problem is the American currency was really strong before the system or during the system. Now, after they themselves suspended the system, the American dollar had to collapse. Like it collapsed. A big, big collapse. Now, you see, fellow forex traders, you all know what it means for a currency to collapse. Investors don't really wait that long. They will just look for another currency that is appreciating, and that is where they will put their money. That is where they will deposit their money so that they can hope to, gain something from that whole appreciation thing. You know how it works. And just like any other forex trader, you know the safe haven that we have of currencies. You guessed that right. The Swiss franc. Now, Switzerland had stronger fiscal principles that ensured monetary stability. So any investor that did not wish their currencies to simply just decline in value, they had to, try out the Swiss franc. Because at this point in time, the 70s, it was the biggest and best bet ever. So, you know what that means? The franc appreciated, like really, really appreciated. Now we're talking about this abnormal appreciation of 5% a day. That's like really huge. But you see, the thing about appreciation is that it's good for certain things, but for certain things it's bad. I'll give you an example. Switzerland is a small country. Because it's a small country, they are rich at the same time, by the way. Now, when a small country is rich, it means they are selling something outside of their country that other people need more than they need it. Switzerland at that time used to make a lot of money from exporting watches and what you know as precision tools, spanners, and those tools like that. So they used to sell lots of those cheaply, and they were really high quality. So because they used to sell a lot of those, that's what their economy used to stand on, manufacturing and the likes of, things of the likes. So picture this. If a spanner is let me say 1 franc. 1 franc. And if a spanner is 1 franc, and on the forex rate, I'm just giving an example, 1 franc is equal to $2. It means someone will use like $200 to, buy 100 spanners from Switzerland. Remember, they were cheap. Now, when the currency appreciates, it means 1 franc is no longer equal to $2. Because the franc is big, now 1 franc may be like $4. That is dangerous. Why? Because a person who used to buy 100 spanners for $200 now has to buy them for like what, 800 or something. You understand? So it's like too big. Anyone who is exporting or who is importing from, it becomes expensive for exporters to actually buy your things from Switzerland and take them out wherever it is that they were taking them. So the export industry kind of saw this as a problem. Yes, it's good for the currency to appreciate, but if it runs out of control and your country is one of those countries that benefits from exports, then it becomes a problem to the production industry. So now that you understand that, let's continue with the story. So, as you know, the currency is appreciating. Why? Deposits are coming in from international, investors trying to put their money in francs. Why? Because other currencies are kind of on a down spiral, and the franc is a safe haven, as we all know. So, firstly, the government banned interest rates on foreign deposits. So anyone who deposited money in the bank, in Swiss banks, you are not paid any interest rates. So now they are trying to discourage, investors from investing, from putting money into these banks. So they were like, you're all not going to be paid interests. You get? Now, you see, the problem with that is the country was appreciating so much that these people didn't care about interests. Think about it like this. When you put money in a bank, you get like a 1-2% interest rate after every year. You understand? Because they are using your money to borrow businesses, to lend businesses, and things like, they are using your money for different projects. So they pay you for that. So in this case, those payments were banned. But you see, investors kept on pouring in money. Why? Because the currency is appreciating. So if a Swiss franc is appreciating at a rate of 5%, I don't really think I need the 1%. The 1% you're banning, you can keep it and take it. So these guys just kept on putting in money. So the franc continued to appreciate. So the government is like, okay, bring it on. We are going to create more draconian principles or more draconian laws, more draconian, they brought it on. So the government put a 2% penalty. Now we are going negative. If you kept $1 million in a Swiss bank in 1971, you had to pay a 2% penalty every quarter, meaning every quarter the government had to take away 20,000 off of every $1 million, just because you're keeping money in their country. So instead of paying you interest rates, they're actually taking away 20,000 from your money. That's what we call a negative interest rate now. We are entering into the negative zone. But like I told you, the currency was growing at a rate of 5%. So even if you take away the 2%, nigga, no one cares. I will still keep my money in your bank, and you will take your 2, I will take the 3. It's still good business. But you see, Switzerland was doing all this, trying to protect its exporters, its manufacturers. You can understand, it's politicians doing their thing. But you see, Switzerland had one problem it could not control: external issues. I'm talking, things happening elsewhere. I'll give you an example. In 1973, there was something called the oil shock. Now, that is a story for another day. But all you need to know is that oil exports were kind of decreased by these Middle Eastern countries because they were trying to punish Western countries for supporting Israel or something like that. That war hasn't just started. Even back in 1973, we had these wrangles. So what happens now is these guys are kind of limiting their sale of oil to these guys. Now, you know what happens when oil is expensive. If you limit the sale of oil, it becomes expensive, and then everything else in the country becomes expensive. And the next thing you know is inflation is high. And when inflation is high, the currency is losing value. So you see now where we're going. Other currencies, the oil shock kind of created a problem for other currencies to continue falling down in terms of value. Now, the investors that were, starting to think about leaving Switzerland, they're like, nah, we're not going to leave Switzerland. They deposit more money. You know what that means? The franc grew even bigger than just the 5% that we were talking about because of the oil shock and the franc continuing to grow because of the influx of too much foreign deposits. The government had to go draconian. They now increased their penalty to 12%. 12 really, if you were to put a million francs in a Switzerland bank, you were given a penalty of 12% off of that money. You get? But you see, now I'm talking about abnormal growth. The Swiss franc is growing at a rate of like 25%. So, same mathematics work. You can take away the 12, I will remain with the 12. I'm actually making more business than I was making even before. So, this was more business than even starting a business. You could kind of just keep your money in francs. It was some kind of arbitrage. It was a lottery kind of thing. So now we are talking about protests. As in, you have protests all over the cities. Well, Switzerland doesn't have a lot of cities. I think they're like 3, as in large cities. But you have protests here and there. Because, of course, guess what? Production was down. Factories were working or operating under capacity. You understand? Like I said, industrial production was down to like 15% in 1975 alone, something like that. You had like 30 to 40 demonstrations in a single week. You get? Now, it may sound dangerous, but it wasn't that dangerous because it's Switzerland. What do you think they do when they protest? As in, these guys, when they are protesting, they sound like a Catholic mass. It's boring. There's no looting. It's not fun, basically, for those of us that come from, places where riots are, a thing to remember. Now, because of these peaceful demonstrations, these guys are actually arguing about jobs and, they are complaining we are losing our jobs. As in, picture this. Before the Bretton Woods Agreement is, suspended, Switzerland had an unemployment rate official of 81. 81 people. I'm talking 81. 8 and 1, right? And by 1975, there were 32,000 unemployed people. A country had an unemployment rate of 81. There were literally only 81 guys that didn't have jobs out of 6 million. And 32,000 now don't have jobs. So they really had a reason to protest. And even those that had jobs, they were not sure where they were keeping them. So they really had to protest. But they were so peaceful that it didn't scare any investors. Normally that scares investors. This one did not scare any investors. Guess what? Money continued to flow in. What did you think? Now the government is a bit tired. I'm talking about like 1975. The government is tired. It's really tired of these things. Because you see, it's a free market. You cannot stop anyone from depositing money in your bank, right? And the truth is, the government was kind of earning from these things because it was like really taxing these guys a lot of money. So anyway, when you think about it, by 1975, the government becomes more draconian. It imposes a 41% annual tax. 41. So if you have $1 million in deposits in a Swiss bank, you are given a 41% penalty, meaning 410,000 goes to the government. So how do you tell me the government wasn't liking this? Of course it was enjoying this, But you see, the Swiss franc at this rate was growing at a rate of 70%. In 1975, the franc was growing at a rate of 70%. So this 40% penalty, it wasn't really that draconian. As in, they were taking the government's share of the deposits, but even the investors were earning something when they kept on investing in, depositing their money in francs. So, just like that, now you are stuck in this situation. What do you think happens next? Like I told you, I'm talking about negative interest rates. This is Switzerland trying to do something new, and it turns out bizarre for everyone. Like, really bizarre. So, by 1975, we were in problems. There's protests. People are bringing in more money. The world is, on the brink of war. The Cold War was really at its height at that time. So people didn't trust a lot into what is going to happen in the future. So they had to keep their money in a safe haven. Like you all know. That is what they call the Swiss franc. So Switzerland battled with these problems up to I think the early 80s. Because you see, the problem always comes from America. When America doesn't get their crap together, the whole world is, having problems. So what happened was the Federal Reserve finally curbed inflation around the early 1980s. So now investors started, trusting the dollar again, so they could, get their deposits from Switzerland, take them back to the USA, and just like that, the Swiss franc started, declining, and until it became normal. You see, you have to be in a position where you are balancing exporters and importers, because think of it like this: exporters gain from a weak currency, but then importers gain from a strong currency. So you need to keep it balanced, so that both of them, because both of those people make up the business class, so that both of them are earning, and none of them is like earning a lot and the other one is becoming broke. So making the world hard for one is not good for politicians. It's not even good for the country in itself. So as the bank or the reserve bank, you have to, keep that in mind. Anyway, at the end of the day, Switzerland wasn't even saved by itself. It was saved by the same external problems that actually caused the problem. The USA's weird politics. We all know they are weird. Some of you may like them, but we all know they are weird.